Hello, I'm Padma Rao and you're watching WION, a special edition of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington. First, the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrives in Washington. The first agenda meeting with business leaders. Ahead of Prime Minister Modi's visit, meeting with US President Trump calls Modi a true friend. PM Modi responds by tweeting that he looks forward to discussions with President Trump.
He has some understanding about India. He's done business there, may still be doing business there.
High expectations in Washington from Prime Minister Modi's visit. The United States hopes to press India to remove barriers to trade and investment. "123 people burnt to death and 15 severely injured after an oil tanker catches fire in Bahawalpur in Pakistan." Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Washington, D.C. today to begin the second leg of his three-nation tour. He will hold his first face-to-face meeting with United States President Donald Trump since he took office. Defense, trade, counter-terrorism and economic cooperation are expected to top the agenda. President Trump, ahead of Prime Minister Modi's arrival, took to Twitter. He said, and I quote, "I look forward to welcoming India's Prime Minister Modi to the White House. Important strategic issues to discuss with a true friend." Prime Minister Narendra Modi, upon his arrival, thanked President Trump on Twitter for the warm welcome, saying he's looking forward to the talks. I have with me in the studio two very special guests. I have Mr. Gautam Mukherjee, who is an economist and a columnist of repute, rather irreverent and cheeky columns sometimes. And I have Constantino Xavier, who is a senior scholar, a South Asia scholar at the Carnegie India group. So welcome to both of you. And I'm going to, as I said to you, Gautam and Constantino, you know, the two foreign officers have been speaking about their expectations from this visit. The US side is gung-ho. The Indian one seems more guarded. But both have used a common lingua franca, which is, you know, management English that sort of seems sadly to have become the global mother tongue today. So let's play with this, and I'm going to address you accordingly. And, you know, look at it through these perspectives and prisms. Now, they're talking about the deliverables. In economic terms, Gautam Mukherjee, what is it all about? We know that the H-1B is on the agenda and the 123 nuclear agreement is stuck. Tell us what the deliverables are.
I think in the H-1B issue, what has been already said by Trump quite a few days ago is that the ones at the top, the people who actually bring in the kind of technical ability, software ability that cannot be hired locally, are most welcome. But it's this body shopping that our IT industry unfortunately has been doing for donkey's years, raking it in on just a cost-benefit analysis.
Right.
Now, that is not innovation. And if they're today in trouble, it's their own fault. They've had 15 years at this, and all they've done is sent in cheap programmers.
Right.
I mean, cheaper than what it costs them in America to.
Right.
And this has been partly the story of globalization.
Yes.
Even in all sorts of things, when they export all their manufacturing to China for the dolls and the hammers and the nails and so on. And with that, what you get is, okay, a lot of jobs at the low end disappear, but at the same time, you don't really create anything other than mass production somewhere else at a cheaper price point.
Right.
That changes in due course, and you know. But today, what India will have to do and what America will not resist is letting people come in at the high end so that they actually contribute.
Right. Constantino, looking at it from the strategic point of view, you know, you study South Asia strategy, defense deals. What do you expect could be deliverables given the stance that the two countries have? There's America first and there's Make in India.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to take a step back first, Pama, because you mentioned deliverables, which is always what journalists and think tankers like me are hunting for. What is going to happen? What will the joint statement say? What will both prime ministers agree on? What's the meat of all that? That's deliverables. And the big puzzle in this is that this is a visit which has very few deliverables on the horizon. So we're really hunting and trying to find out what will happen, because we know that there's a person in the White House which has personalized U.S. foreign policy, sidelined the State Department, the diplomats, the bureaucrats, and therefore a lot of this hinges on the personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump.
So are you saying this is just a get to know each other kind of meeting?
I think that's the first step, absolutely. And it's rare that this happens in world politics, but sometimes it's very important. In this case, given also the strong personality of Prime Minister Modi, I think everyone is in great expectation about the low expectations on deliverables, but about a high expectation about the personal rapport between these two individuals. On the defense issue, I think everything flows from there. If they see eye to eye on the importance of India in Asia, and I think that's President Trump's choice, you'll have to understand whether India is going to play an important role or not, which for the last 10 years the US has been very strongly advocating that India needs to take a bigger role in the Indian Ocean, in Afghanistan, to contain China, build up its defense, modernize its defense so the US can sell also its defense items, of course, to India. But if he agrees on this narrative, which has been the last 10 years, the view from America on India, we will have continuity.
Surely, gentlemen, the Prime Minister and the President, they have spoken on 3 occasions, and the last one was a rather unusual one when President Trump called to congratulate Prime Minister Modi on what was essentially a domestic election result, you know, in Uttar Pradesh. So, I mean, why the guarded optimism then from you, Constantino? You know, and because diplomats say that the spade work has been going on, that the actual visit might be just for a day, but that the spade work's been going on for months.
Well, 2 things. We don't know about the actual work, and from what I hear, the work, you know, there's work in progress as always, but there's been a lot of hiccups on that side because, again, the decision is taken by the White House, and if the White House doesn't step in, it all hinges on this visit. But on the larger, the problems, I think one area of concern for India, which has delayed and created some anxiety here in Delhi about the US under Trump, has been his relation with China. You have President Trump in his campaign speaking very negatively about China and then mellowing down and engaging Xi Jinping in his visit to the US and finding sort of a very good relationship with China, which makes things more difficult for India.
Speaking of the chemistry, Gautam, back to you, you know, the 3 conversations that the two have had so far, how do you assess them?
I think Trump has it in mind to add something to the strategic relationship. It's already 16 years in the works. It started with George W. Bush. To an extent, it even started with Bill Clinton. The way he handled our nuclear weaponization and the way he handled our Kargil war, intervening really on our side. Mildly, but it began there. It certainly picked up, but it picked up at the end of Bush's 2nd term. Which is when, you know, the nuclear deal went through. And then Obama, again, at the end of his 2nd term, when we are designated a strategic partner and LEMOA and so on, none of which got operationalized during his term. Now, what I think Trump may have in mind, and I think it's highly workable, is that, you know, it was always a either or kind of look that if we do things with India, then China is going to get upset. Pakistan's going to get upset. So a balancing act. So no real movement has taken place in. It's a very, very, very slow minuet.
Right.
Yeah. Now, China has in fact shown us the way, shown possibly America the way, because it just blatantly goes ahead and does whatever it wants with its ally and vassal Pakistan.
Right.
And then kind of smooths it over. It blocks progress when it comes to India, NSG, other places, you know, naming terrorists as terrorists.
That's right.
And all America has to do is ramp up the Indian relationship without diminishing or treating, you know, the thing as a troika, and instead doing what it needs to do with Pakistan in its own place and do what it needs to do with China in its own place.
Yes.
If that happens...
So recalibrate its approach to the entire region.
Just keep ramping up with India and doing whatever it feels like, you know, feels is in their best interest to do in China and Pakistan as well. Right. Not always looking at a three-way, you know, balancing act, right? Because then nobody gets anywhere.
But surely, Constantino, that let me take this to him. That has really hardly ever happened, has it?
It's not
Pakistan
happened,
you know, Pakistan and India have always been thrown in the same basket. U.S. policy has always been towards, you know, like AFPAC is joined together now. It's always been India-Pakistan. It's not actually been. Do you think that's likely to change? Because, I mean, let's not forget that Trump comes from, you know, not the world of sort of genteel politics in downtown DC, but he does come from a very hardcore business world. So isn't he likely to look at India differently and recalibrate?
Yeah, so we had last year something called dehyphenation. Yeah. So something India celebrated because for the first time the US started looking at India and Pakistan through different prisms. And India was, you know, like that, and in the sense that it was treated in a different way as a more of a strategic, long-term partner than Pakistan. That is unsure if that's going to continue. And I think, interestingly, Trump's silence on South Asian issues, I mean, the lack of any major decision on this region of the world, this sort of vacuum of policy making in America, has created some concern here in India that you're going to be somehow forgotten, and in that sense, even an interest to rehyphenate their relations. So you've had indications on the Indian side that the US should take greater pressure on Pakistan now. So I think there's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how he's going to deal with Pakistan. So on the one hand, you have Prime Minister, you have on the American side indications that President Trump is going to go harder on Pakistan, Muslim majority state, a harbor of terrorism, all that story about Pakistan. On the other hand, it could also be a very important ally, and continues to be very important ally of the United States in Afghanistan, and to support around 10,000 military forces who are still there in Afghanistan.
I'll come to the nitty-gritties of Afghanistan and Pakistan in a bit, but you know, I've been sort of dying to go to my next management term, which is low-hanging fruit. This is one I particularly detest. Tell me, from your points of view, gentlemen, what do you see as low-hanging fruit in terms of, you know, the economic takeaways from this visit, and in terms of defense and strategy, and also keeping in mind the China prism which Gautam introduced? Either of you, go first.
One thing is, and this is something that India badly wants, and America can make a profit at it, which is what Trump is very keen on. He has to, you know, ramp up the economy and do something that is visible, easily understandable, is defense cooperation. The other issue is that, you know, today, increasingly, America says things to China and China doesn't do anything about it. It sort of agreed to go and rein in North Korea. And net-net, it's very similar to what Pakistan used to do when George W. Bush used to tell it that you know, you have to stop this. You sponsored it. All the people in 9/11 were Pakistanis or Saudis. And then nothing happened because, and then they had Osama bin Laden right next door in Abbottabad. So,
but with this,
excuse me, yeah. With this, what needs to happen now is the minnow that is India. It's all very well saying, you know, participate in Afghanistan, participate in, you know, wherever ISIS, but we don't have the wherewithal because economically we're at under 3 trillion, and China is being quite insouciant at 15 trillion plus. So we need our economy ramped up. We need our defenses substantially increased. We don't have planes to fly. We don't have ships to submarines. We don't really have it, not even ammunition, truth be told. So how do we go from here to there? A lot of acceleration can be provided by American cooperation, and which automatically gives it leverage vis-a-vis China. But this is what has theoretically been stated but never done.
Never done. Low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit, one is obviously one which both countries agree on, terrorism, and the importance to combat terrorism, sharing of intelligence, prevention of terrorism, counter-radicalization strategies with Muslim communities. That's happening, and there'll be complete harmony there. But the real low-hanging fruit in terms of business, and if fruit has to be juicy and has to bring something to the table, would be the sale of US drones to the Indian Navy.
Yes.
This was approved by President Obama. It's in the tracks. It has the support of the Defense Department in the US. It has there's some reluctance on the State Department side because of Pakistan and all that. But if President Trump gives the go-ahead to this, and this is announced over the next few hours during this visit, I think that will create a very important signal for India that the US trusts India and is still committed to supporting India's military modernization. This is very important because generally these drones, naval drones, which hover around up to 30, 40 hours in the Indian Ocean to collect intelligence, to see where submarines, boats, ships, etc., they're only shared with US allies, main allies in Asia. So for example, Japan, etc., but they haven't. So this would be a major exception to that and would send a very strong signal that the US is committed to India's greater power projection capabilities in the Indian Ocean.
Let's look at now, let's look at the two men in themselves, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. Do you see, both of them do not, as I said, belong to the political establishment of the capitals of the two countries. They have had, Prime Minister Modi has had huge success as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, and President Trump has been a successful businessman. They come from a totally different world altogether. What are the similarities and differences for each of you in the two men?
Well, both of them are self-made men who have demonstrated a lot of courage early in life. Trump came into Manhattan. His father always worked in Queens, if I got that right, and said that, oh no, Manhattan is too much for us. We're a small company. He did that, I think, in his 30s or late 20s. And never looked back. Okay, ups, downs, bankruptcies, all that. But, so he's got a can-doism and a self-confidence which is extremely apparent. The same can be said for Modi, because he came from very, very humble circumstances, which worked in his favor as it happened, but especially with the kind of highlighting that the other side put to it. But his adaptability is breathtaking. He came into the prime ministership never having done anything at the center and took to it like a duck to water. He's gone around the world, woken up our very arthritic foreign policy. We've neither had the diplomatic, size in our embassies and so on to make a difference. Visa issuing offices is all they really were. The ambassador was about the only one who could, which is not, for example, if you compare it with the American diplomatic establishment, that is a machine.
Absolutely.
Even though bureaucratic. So that was one. So now he is our ambassador in chief and has woken up the world to India, which again, for a 3-year stint, is remarkable.
Absolutely. Do you see that somewhat differently as far as the US Foreign Office is concerned under Trump? Because, they have been speaking in two different tongues on various issues. There seems to be some sort of a dichotomy between what the State Department thinks and what President Donald Trump himself does. So do you see a diametrically opposite situation in Washington, D.C.?
I think both systems have been centralizing towards their executive leaders. So I think Prime Minister Modi has taken several decisions at the top, but he's kept the bureaucracy, of course, in the loop. I think on the US side, it's a bit more disturbing what's been happening. You've had an unprecedented centralization of foreign policy making. But on the personal issue, I think that's a very, very important issue. I think all leaders are alpha types, but these are both super alphas, right? This is going to be a clash of titans in personality. And we've seen how important this is for President Trump and how he engages people. So and this is a puzzle, and I think this is going to be very interesting to see that first moment they meet, because you have I think President Trump's typical attitude of certain despondency and certain casualty, but also certain superiority and arrogance, if I may say. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Prime Minister Modi is going to react to that. He's a politician by nature. He's a political animal, as we know. He plays that game very well, Prime Minister Modi, but he also has a domestic audience he has to play to. So he won't want to be subdued and show off as a submissive personality towards President Trump.
Yeah. Right. I'll come back to both of you very shortly. We are now going to see what Barack Obama in 2015 would be praising Narendra Modi in an article in Time magazine, suggesting that Prime Minister Modi's life reflected the potential of India's rise. Fast forward to 2017 and the White House has a new occupant, Donald Trump, unpredictable, stubborn and politically inexperienced. Can the Indian Prime Minister develop a close working relationship with President Obama's successor? Will President Trump be as receptive as President Obama? Take a look.
मैं बहुत भाग्यशाली हूं कि मेरे देशवासी जिन्होंने भारत की आन बान शान को बढ़ाया है,
a grand reception with thousands in attendance at New York's iconic Madison Square Garden. An Indian Prime Minister on the US soil garnering worldwide attention, shedding inhibitions to mark the beginning of a new foreign policy.
एक जमाना था हमारे देश को साफ सपेरों वालों का देश माना जाता था.
We discussed towards the end of our meeting as well.
The Prime Minister would later meet United States President Barack Obama at White House to start a new era of cooperation between the two countries.
भारत और अमेरिका के बीच मार्स पर समिट के बाद अब यह समिट धरती पर हो रहा है. यह शुभ संयोग हमारे संबंधों की क्षमता का प्रतिबिंब है.
The relationship between the leaders of world's oldest and biggest democracies only strengthening each time they met. And Modi and Obama would meet several times in the next couple of years, and every meet resulted in deals and greater cooperation. From US involvement in smart cities projects to partnership in the field of clean energy and upgradation in defense ties to a joint vision on regional security. Modi and Obama's personal equation aligning the interests of the states and India. So it didn't come as a surprise when Obama praised Narendra Modi as a reflection of India's potential, a leader with an ambitious vision and a man who transcended the ancient and the modern. However, Obama is now in retirement and Donald Trump is the new US president, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's task is cut out. Will Trump accord the same importance to Indo-US relationship as Barack Obama did? Can Modi and Trump work together to lead India and the states on a path of mutual respect and development? A better picture will emerge when both leaders meet this Monday. Bureau Report, WION.
Hi, welcome back to the special broadcast on Prime Minister Modi's visit in Washington, D.C. The two men are going to meet for the very first time, President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi, and to break it all down, and we're doing so in management terms. I have Constantino Xavier and Gautam Mukherjee. Coming back to you, gentlemen, you know, there is going to be this one-on-one meet. There are two things that both the sides are making much about, at least the United States spokespeople. They're saying that, you know, there's the very fact that Prime Minister Modi is going to have dinner in the White House with President Trump is a first time, and they're reading some significance into that. And they're also saying that that there is going to be a 30-minute one-on-one or 20-minute one-on-one meeting between the two leaders behind closed doors. If I were to ask you, what do you think, I'll start with you, Constantino, are going to be, let's say, the top 2 subjects on Prime Minister Modi's mind when he goes into that room?
I mean, I think, first of all, it's a good indication that there is an outreach from the White House in terms of engaging personally, and that's encouraging. I'd say before 1 and 2, there's a 0 element, which is they actually having that private moment to talk to each other. And I think 2 other topics on top of that, besides that, getting to know each other, which is very important, because it's very different from the Chinese. If a Chinese president meets with a US president, it tends to be more of a formal meeting. We know the Chinese, how they behave. They like that formality, the protocol, etc. I mean, India and the US, the strength of these 2 countries, whether it's the personal level of the presidents or the leaders in that sense, or at the lower level of people-to-people exchange, has always been the vibrancy, the richness, the wealth, the freedom to talk, as 2 very vibrant democracies.
Tell me something, Constantino. When meetings like this take place, Gautam, you might know, now, for instance, Prime Minister Modi, is he going to have an interpreter with him in that room? In that sense, they're not really going to be one-on-one, are they? I would imagine it would be the same with the Chinese president.
It depends. I mean, in this case, I'm not sure what the protocol is going to be, but Prime Minister Modi has been known to even, despite language barriers, reach out. I'm thinking of the Prime Minister of Portugal was here in January, who speaks very badly English, but they reached out and had a private moment without interpreters.
Yes.
But on the 2 topics, I mean, I mentioned terrorism is going to be a very important one, I think. And I think they'll leave the largest strategic issues of China to their bureaucrats and their advisors. But I think the economics is going to take a driving seat also in this relationship. Trade issues, investment, the future of the multilateral order in terms of trade after various agreements failed. So I think that's going to be a major issue to see what's the role of India going to be across defense, strategy, trade, and how does the US think of India's role, and how does India think of the US role. And I think that conversation is going to take place between both leaders.
Right. Gautam, how about
I think the 20-minute meeting will not cover a list. I think it's going to talk about, with Obama, his immediate predecessor, there's sort of Modi's charm offensive versus Obama's charm offensive. Now, with Trump, they're both doers, and that is the connection. And I think the key thing that is going to be discussed one-on-one without interpreters is China, because Trump is unable to control China, and Xi Jinping is using that. And the plans that China has advanced, OBOR, etc., are definitely going to aggressively cut into America's influence, South China Sea included. India can play a part, but it must be willing. And that's what these 2 heads of state, heads of government, are going to agree on.
Oh, you're going one step further, Gautam, than either Constantino or me.
Yes.
You're actually saying that there's going to be an agreement of sorts, tacit agreement, if you like, or a verbal one within that room.
A chemistry.
Behind those closed doors.
The next going into major conferences, G20 and so forth. And Modi is shortly going to Israel.
That's right.
The muscle arm of America in the West Asian and very increasingly closer to India, without the kerfuffle that is involved in any kind of agreement with all the checks and balances you've got in America. So some of it will be, and is evident that some of it is already directed via Israel, though I'm not discounting Israel's own desire to act independently of America vis-a-vis India. But with all of that put together, this is also the first visit of a prime minister to Israel, coming up just after this. So I think they will not talk about the laundry list. The laundry list will be left to the usual, officials and the, little by little commas, full stops. They're going to talk. And Trump's style is entirely like that. And Modi's would be if he had his own way. And it was much more like that when he was in Gujarat as a, tuto capotito, and not so much in the center, because he's told that he's got to balance so many forces. Right.
I come to the next dreaded term, due diligence. Constantino, President Trump has, has almost promised his voters to overturn everything that his predecessor, President Obama, did. And one of the things President Obama did was to build, as Gautam was saying, a fabulous relationship which, worked well in terms of personal chemistry as well as many things achieved with Prime Minister Modi. Now, if President Trump is committed in a way to overturn or, sort of roll back much of what was achieved under President Obama, would that include this relationship with Prime Minister Modi?
I think roll back is a bit exaggerated. I think that's a worst case scenario which is quite distant. The problem is letting the relations stagnate and not continue investing in it. And that's of concern to India. And the big question is China, naturally. I think the biggest question from the Indian side is, President Trump, what is your long-term strategy towards China? For example, on the Belt and Road Initiative, which the Chinese have launched, hundreds of billions of investments worldwide for communications, connectivity to Europe, risking isolating India. I mean, just in Bangladesh, you have 24 US billion investments announced by the Chinese, which impinges India's interest. The question is, are you going to let the Chinese do whatever they want? And the indications are of concern, because, for example, the US reaction to the Belt and Road Initiative is they've sent an advisor, they were present, they're interested in business opportunities, they're interested actually in somehow playing a part in this, while India didn't attend the summit and stayed away from it. So that's just one example of a concern on the Indian side of how there's more of an engagement policy towards China. And sort of this American approach of saying, you Chinese take care of your little area, East Asia if you want, do more if you want, which is in big contrast with what was said during the campaign, where President Trump was saying, I'll support a nuclear Japan, I want our Asian allies who are supported by us to play a bigger role themselves, to be more independent, etc. I think this narrative is of greater concern to India, that the US is somehow going to retrench from Asia, it's going to play less of a leading role, and is going to stay in its own corner, which is all about America first and let's build our economy, without playing a more active role, which somehow supports India to also play a more activist role in Asia.
Right. Gautam, what about pressures on Prime Minister Modi? Will there be any? We just spoke of the kind of, we were speculating about whether there may be pressure on President Trump because the Obama-Prime Minister Modi relationship was just so spectacular.
I think the big pressure on Modi is if he comes away without achieving anything. He has to make this relationship work. Unlike the other two
That's a lot of pressure to place on a Prime Minister for during a one-day visit.
Doesn't matter. It's not the 1 day or the 6 days. Usually, even when he does come here, he spends about the same amount of time with the President and his top people. The rest of the time, he's talking to the diaspora in his various visits, That's a different kind of thing. Here, it is business. It's a business dinner. The whole thing is trying, I think, on both sides to actually get somewhere and achieve an equation with a new administration under 6 months in the saddle, which has not been afforded to India before. I mean, this has gone on, and the only time they sort of did something about India is when they were lame ducks. And they might as well do something in foreign policy sort of thing. But now, the point is that if they hit it off, not just, as people, which I think they will, because even though they come from very different backgrounds and economic circumstances, right, I think they have personality traits in common.
Right. Let's take a look at what my colleague Archit Seshadri is doing in Washington, D.C. He spoke to Raymond Vickery. Now, Raymond was a former Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Let's talk specifically about Donald Trump and his presidency. There's been a lot of talk about one of the most bizarre presidencies in the U.S., his handshakes, his use of bold statements, perhaps, contradictory statements. Give us a sense of that.
Well, I think President Trump is a work in progress. I think no man comes to this job, which is so overwhelming. You got the nuclear football following you around. You've got complexity on anything that's ever occurred in a real estate deal. Dealing with the Congress is not the same as negotiating what happens with an office tower. So I think the president is learning about that. Hopefully that learning curve will not take too long. I do believe that with what he's done and appointing people like Ken Juster is very helpful in that regard. He has some understanding about India. He's done business there, may still be doing business there, which raises another issue. But my view is that what we have is a very strong underlying relationship. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is only 1/3 of the federal government establishment, much less what we have as a federal system like the Indian system, what happens at the state level, what happens in private business. All those are really a part of the U.S.-India relationship. Now, President Trump can move it forward or he can be a handicap. And I'm voting for his moving it forward, and I think that he'll do that.
And lastly, let me also ask you, is he too busy with domestic policies, dealing with the Russian allegations, dealing with Obamacare, dealing with taxes, to address some of the more critical foreign policies, including the fight on terrorism and building ties with other world leaders?
Well, that is a distraction. There is no question about it, from basic security kinds of situations and what the U.S. and India need to do in regard to terrorism, in regard to China, in regard to what happens in Afghanistan, across the board. So it is a distraction. I won't sugarcoat that at all. And there are a lot of holes in the administration. We don't even have an Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia at this point. The ambassadorship is empty. And there are distractions, but as we say in the United States, you've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. There is hope in regard to what happens on Monday, that those kinds of distraction will be put behind him for enough time to be able to concentrate on issues between the U.S. and India.
Let's talk about China and Pakistan as well. When you mentioned that, how crucial is that? Is Trump just playing a diplomatic game with all three countries?
I don't think so. I think that there's a realization that India and the United States is the relationship which is key. Now, India wants good relationships with China. They'd like to have better relationships with Pakistan. It is very worrisome that China and Pakistan, the One Belt, One Road coming through territory in Kashmir, all of those things are very worrisome, but that is an indication of why we need to be able to take this relationship to the next level. We have in place from the Obama administration, from the Bush administration, from the Clinton administration, the kinds of processes that can deal with those. And what the man at the top has to say, what President Trump needs to say is, yes, we're going forward with those, and then we can deal with problems like what happens between China and Pakistan.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome back to the WION studio. World is One News. Here we are on our special broadcast on Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States, where he will meet United States President Donald Trump for the very first time. In the studio with me are Gautam Mukherjee and Constantino Xavier, and we've been talking about, looking at Prime Minister's visit through in management terms largely. So, and we were talking about due diligence. You know, what are the two men? What are the pressures on the two men, expectations from this meeting? You mentioned China, Gautam. You said that, one of the things that India will be top of Prime Minister Modi's agenda is just the worries and concerns about China's One Belt, One Road initiative, for instance, the soft loan, policies of soft loans that follows it around the world, that a lot of countries will end up bankrupt. Can you take that further? How is it linked, and how is Prime Minister Modi going to present
that India has about China is not the real leverage. I mean, we've been complaining about Pakistan and China for ages. Nobody is that bothered because it doesn't affect them. But what China is now doing, the aggression of its new imperial, and it's been said even by Chinese think tanks, Pakistani think tanks, let alone, observers and analysts all over the world. One, it's extremely expensively priced for infrastructure projects, 8 to 16% interest charges. 2, the money is handed out by the Chinese banks, and then there's a steep payback which starts almost immediately. So usually in development projects is a long period that you pay back at a very low rate of interest, and it is paid for by bodies like the ADB, the World Bank, IMF, which are geared for the purpose, or even the BRICS Bank. Instead, this is Chinese commercial banks handing out money because they've got surplus capacity and capabilities in China, and they're exporting all of this, keeping people busy, kicking the can down the road.
Yes.
Bankrupt, and who's taking it? People who cannot afford that kind of infrastructure.
Gautam, but how likely is President Donald Trump to actually, lend an ear to a Prime Minister? And why would Prime Minister Modi, in the presence of the US President,
I don't think Prime Minister Modi will be bringing this up. I think Trump will be bringing it up. Right. And Trump will be saying, I've got to do something about China. Now, will you play along and do what I ask you to? And so he'll say, okay, what?
So he's going to be asking Prime Minister Modi to whether he's going to play along, or is he going to be asking him for advice? Because as a leader who knows
Trump's
the region
not
better.
The one to ask for advice. Right. He knows he's the most powerful man in the world. He's a... No, that's not it. But yes, I think he needs a reliable... When he calls him a true friend, that's a hint that, look, I'm willing to put my arm around your shoulder as long as you play consistent. I need somebody who doesn't play too much diplomacy with me.
Right. Constantino, Indo-US relations, that's another area that you've been focused on for very long. What are they like? What state, can you describe in what state they are right now?
See, I mean, we spoke a lot about individuals and the both leaders in both countries. But what's really going to be a test in this visit, and I think it's going to show the strength of the various committed actors in this relationship. On the US side, the defense establishment, whether it's producing nuclear reactors or military assets. The Hill, people on the Hill, congressmen and congresswomen who are very committed to India and see the importance of a democratic, strong India. The economic and business interests, which have a strong interest in a greater Indian economy, a more liberalized and open economy, who have benefited from that. Civil society, right? A tremendous relationship between India and the US in exchanges in science, technology, education. This is all very new over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's grown very strong power in terms of influencing the relationship. So despite whatever happens, I think it's going to be very interesting that despite, President Trump and his sort of uncertainty in how he's going to behave, I think the pressures from within the US are going to prevail. And it says a lot about the relationship and how it changed over the last 10 years. That you have so strong, committed, activist, lobbyists, advocates for a stronger relation. That will come up, and I think that will put pressure on the White House, and it has been putting pressure already on the White House over the last few weeks, to keep the engagement going with India. So we tend to, of course, focus on the leaders and look at the possible spoiler effect of President Trump and his erratic behavior, or he's not interested in India. But in the end, I think this is a test to the relationship, and my hint is it's going to be passing this test, and because of these strong, committed actors in DC. And just look back 10 years ago. Pakistan was in many ways more influential 15 years ago in Washington, D.C. Even in 2008-9, when I arrived, for example, in D.C., and I lived there for the last 7 years, and I remember, it was a very difficult moment. It was the golden years of AfPak. The focus was on Afghanistan, therefore also on Pakistan. The U.S. pumped above U.S. $30 billion into the Pakistani economy, most of which ended up in military hands. Those days are over now, and I think eventually what prevailed is the strength of this open relationship between India and the U.S., which is driven above all by economic and civil society interests.
Constantino, those days are over, but then Afghanistan, continues to remain in a state of limbo. The United States has been waiting, poised to move out of there, but you definitely there is a situation on the ground which requires boots on the ground, so to speak, whether those are Indian boots or American boots. Likely that President Trump might request India or ask India or try to persuade Prime Minister Modi to be more active and take a more active global role as far as boots on the ground are concerned, and I mean much more than United Nations peacekeeping troops.
Boots on the ground in Afghanistan is a question, but absolutely Absolutely. I think there will be, on Afghanistan in particular, the indication of the US is committed to staying. It is an issue of saving the US face in many ways, and its pride in Afghanistan and not letting it fail, their strategic interest in it. But on Pakistan, there is a different question. It's not anymore we need Pakistani support for 100,000 troops, which you had as Americans 6-7 years ago. Yeah. You have only less than 10,000 now, but what do we do with Pakistan?
Right.
And Pakistan is getting very close to China, as we know.
Right. I'm going to come back to you on the boots on the ground because I want the Indian perspective. But before I do that, Prime Minister Modi's ascent has largely been attributed to his ability to take some tough decisions. The Prime Minister has worked relentlessly to put India on a global pedestal while making it abundantly clear that the interests of India are, of course, his top priority. On the other hand, in the United States, President Trump rose to power while marketing himself as a political outsider who would revolutionize the way things are done and end the alleged nexus between the political elite and large businesses. Trump triumphed, so to speak, with the promise to make America great again. It's only natural then to ask, do Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have a lot in common? Take a look.
They're both outsiders who managed to rise to leadership positions, not just within their parties, but also consolidated their powers with mandates. Modi and Trump have shown that they can break the status quo in prevalent political discourse. Be it his ability to take unilateral decisions that could alter current narratives,
आज मध्य रात्रि यानी 8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से वर्तमान में जारी 500 रुपए और 1000 रुपए के करेंसी नोट लीगल टेंडर नहीं रहेंगे.
or his push for indigenous growth,
मैं आज लाल किले की प्राचीर से विश्व भर में लोगों से कहना चाहता हूं, कम मेक इन इंडिया.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is known for his policy-based approach towards governance. Trump, meanwhile, has managed to take decisions that are against popular opinion too, be it repealing Obamacare.
Today, the House is voting to repeal and replace the disaster known as Obamacare. We'll see what happens. It's going to be a very close vote. After we repeal and replace Obamacare, and by the way, it's close not because Obamacare is good, it's close for politics. They know it's no good. Everybody knows it's no good.
Or his crackdown on travel from 6 Muslim-majority nations, which has also been subjected to widespread legal purview. In keeping with his Make America Great Again motto, Trump has managed to curtail influx of immigrants by a crackdown on H-1B visas. Modi too pushed for indigenous growth by bringing in policy initiatives like Make in India, Digital India. But when it comes to global posturing, while Trump has minced no words in criticizing and then pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, a move denounced by global leaders and also leading to America's greater isolation, India, under the leadership of Modi, has vied for a greater role in South Asian geopolitics. The two leaders have had unique communication strategies. While they have both faced a fair share of criticism, Modi has managed to gain a mass appeal owing to his eloquence, alliterations and acronyms. Trump, meanwhile, has managed to raise quite a storm with his Twitter tirades. The real test of their compatibility will be seen only when the two world leaders meet this Monday. Will Modi and Trump be able to bond over shared concerns, or will differences of interest mar the talks, is a question only time will answer. Bureau Report, WION.
Hi, you're with WION, World is One News, and you're watching our continuing coverage of Prime Minister Modi's visit in Washington, D.C., where he will meet President Donald Trump for the very first time. In the studio with me have been Gautam Mukherjee and Constantino Xavier. A very last round of questions to you, gentlemen, on the subject. We were talking about boots on the ground, the fact that many countries expect India as an emerging superpower to take more global responsibility around the world. Now, so just to come to you, Gautam, do you think that is likely to cause a backlash in India? How is Prime Minister Modi likely to react should that request come up in Washington, D.C.?
I think it will be a trade-off between modernizing our armed forces having the resources to do so, strategically speaking, and without the kind of dogmas that we have followed so far, which is to do with non-alignment and all of that back story, going to Afghanistan is probably good for us. One, it's a Muslim country, so the opposition can't say too much about it. Two, the Afghans would welcome us. We have already gone there, built roads, built their parliament, built all sorts of things. We have a presence there, quite a strong intelligence presence as well. From there to actually go into some kind of peacekeeping come policing role, it has to be mild, is not going to do us any harm. The other thing that America has to calculate is that we also have pretty good relationship with Iran, which borders Afghanistan. Our road goes all the way to Chabahar, just about 40 kilometers from Chabahar within the Afghan territory. So there is that to consider as well, because Trump has taken a rather stiff stance against Iran, at least for the moment.
Right. Constantino, peace mediator, India as peace mediator. We've had, in a very exclusive interview, the Syrian President Assad has actually told us that he could well see India as a mediator in many global matters. And so did Ms. Ashrafi in Palestine. So, you know, is India likely to, if not boots on the ground, which is a little more controversial, or has the potential of being more controversial, is India likely to step forward and accept that cloak of global responsibility by offering to mediate?
The president of Cyprus also has made the same suggestion of mediation to India. I think India has always done this. India has been a mediator, has been a facilitator. But what's interesting is that you have President Trump saying now to India and to other powers in Asia, take more responsibilities, step up and do things. I mean, President Obama has said this, but under President Trump has become even more urgent. Do more of your own security interests. And I think India is very much in line with that. And I think Prime Minister Modi has really shifted India's strategic thinking in that sense, has underlined India as a leading power, as an India that is comfortable in taking greater responsibilities. For example, in Yemen, evacuating Indian citizens, right, including American citizens. I mean, you have Indian planes, actually US planes bought by India for the Indian Air Force, taking out US citizens to safety out of Yemen 2 years ago. So you have an India that is much more comfortable in playing that role in the Indian Ocean as a net security provider, as a country that is leading, that is taking active interest in shaping geopolitical security contexts, including in Afghanistan, maybe not with boots on the ground, but in many other ways. I think that's something which is very much in line with what Prime Minister Modi is trying to achieve.
Right. I'm afraid I am completely out of time. Thank you very much, both of you gentlemen, for a most interesting discussion, and I hope to have you back in the WION studios as often as you can get away and give us your insights into South Asia and how we see the world and how the world sees us. That was Gautam Mukherjee and Constantino Xavier, and with that, that's a wrap on this bulletin. But before we leave, have a look at this report on a lighter look at the personalities of Prime Minister Modi and President Donald Trump.
So what will it be? A bear hug? A vigorous handshake? And how many seconds might it last?
Please, look at me.
The Trump-Abe handshake lasted 19 seconds. And it left Abe in visible discomfort. A yes, no, yes moment, like it happened between Modi and Angela Merkel of Germany. Will they at all shake hands? Or will Modi do a Trudeau? Hold Trump by the shoulder in a deft display of timing, balance and control. A selfie, like the ones between Modi and Li Keqiang of China, leaders from the UAE, Mongolia and former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Or with Abbott's successor and current Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Or a recent one with Prime Minister Najib of Malaysia. So will Modi survive the handshake moment with Trump? Or will the Modi-Trump handshake be remembered? Will it spawn memes or provide plenty of fodder for comedians? Watch this space. Bureau Report, WION.